Hey guys, welcome back to the Second Time Lucky Mining channel. In today's video, we are going to have a look at deploying a application onto the Flux network. More specifically, we are going to have a look at deploying a mining pool's front end on the Flux network. Now, before we go ahead and jump in and deploy an application on the Flux network, let's just get the disclaimers out of the way. It might look to you with all of the close that this video is sponsored, but it is not sponsored at all. The Flux team hasn't reached out, asked me to do this, given me Flux to pay for the application. This is purely my initiative. A couple of people has asked or having trouble deploying applications on the Flux network and has asked for some sort of a video to guide them around the process. And that's really what this is. It's just a video to help potentially anybody out there that want to deploy on the Flux network. Now, the last disclaimer is security. Now, with any deployment of any application anywhere, either it being on-prem in the cloud or a SaaS application, there is a bunch of security stuff that you need to go and look into before you go ahead and deploy your application. Again, if you are responsible. Now, me personally, I wouldn't deploy anything sensitive on the Flux network. In this case, it's a website and it's a mining pool's front end. It's not a database holding people's credit card, birth records, all of that type of stuff on the Flux network. So again, for me, the security is fine. It's just the front end. So I'm not too worried about it. But again, I wouldn't do anything sensitive on the Flux network. Again, if you are considering that type of stuff, reach out to the team, look into all of the security assumptions that you are making. Again, I am at the moment, I am a node provider, so I know the typical tests that the Flux team sort of run periodically to make sure that number one, my system is passing benchmarks, and what do I need to do from a security patching point of view. So I know they monitor all these things, so that's why I am comfortable or uncomfortable deploying certain applications on the Flux network. But enough of me talking about it. Let me jump onto the computer and I'll show you guys how to deploy the application on the Flux network.
Okay, so here we are on the computer. Now, to launch an application on the Flux network, there's really lots of different options that you can use. It really depends on which way do you want to access it. Now, I'm a little bit more old school. I'm going to use home.runonflux.io, but you could use, and in the past I've tried using Jetpack, so Jetpack, and then this is the new site here, cloud.runonflux.io. Now, I've tried all of them before. I've run into issues with the latest cloud.runonflux. The deploy button just doesn't want to work. At least that's for me. So I don't know if it's a setup thing or me thing. I'm assuming it's a me thing, but in this demo, we are going to use the home.runonflux application or website to launch the application. Now, what I'm going to do, and this is a lot of things that has changed since I've done this video in the past, there is now lots of different ways that you can log in here and basically associate the application to yourself. So you can use, I still have Zelcore. Again, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the Zelcore wallet, but I have an application and I need to have it. So that's why I've got Zelcore. But you can use SSP, you can use MetaMask, you can use emails. There's lots of different options here. Again, I haven't tried all of these options. I still have my Zel ID or Zelcore, so that's just what I'm going to use in this demo. But again, before we log in, you need to make sure that you are logged into home.runonflux. Again, that's just a way for the team to sort of link you to the application or link a user to the application that can actually manage it, look at the logs, restart, all that type of stuff. Now, in terms of the application that I'm going to put on the Flux network, in this case, I'm going to make use of what Mark the Shark, and again, this is the Sigmanauts mining pool. And again, if you're a Ergo miner, I would definitely encourage you guys to go and have a look at the Sigmanauts mining pool. It's run by the community, so it's not some sort of corporation that's running 15 mining pools just to try and get as much money out of possible. It's really people that are into Ergo. There's tons of bonus rewards, all sorts of things like that. So I'll definitely advise you guys to take a look at least at the pool, especially if you're mining Ergo. Now, Mark the Shark's been doing a great job of the front end of the application. I think it runs on Mining Core, but they've tried to separate at least the front end towards where Mining Core runs. And again, that's sort of what this demo is about. We're going to see if we can get the mining pool's front end at least to be hosted and running on Flux. So this is Mark the Shark's GitHub of all of the code for the front end of the mining pool. So kudos to him. I'm going to have a look at the DB branch. I know he's been doing work on that. He's literally, as I'm doing this video, he's pushed some changes this morning. So I'm not sure what's going to work, what's not going to work, but we'll figure it out. Now, the other thing is, if you're launching something on the Flux network, it needs to be Dockerized. So it needs to be a Docker application. So it doesn't matter what you want to launch on Flux. If it can run in Docker, it can run on Flux. So what Mark has done is he's pushed that image specifically to Docker. So we're going to use this to get the application. Now, I'm also going to use one of the new features that the Flux team has added recently, a couple of weeks ago, I think, or maybe it's a month or two ago. No, probably more weeks. Anyway, so they've made use of some of the Docker Compose functionality. Now, if you are going to run, and again, you can run this mining pool locally. I obviously consider people to do that. You don't have to obviously run this on the Flux network. Again, the reason why I'm doing it is, again, just to show how to get an application on the Flux network. But anyway, it makes use of Docker Compose, and within the Docker Compose file, if I just click on it here for a second, it basically consists out of two steps or two services. There's a database component, which Mark's using Postgres for, and then he's using a image here. You can see sort of he's been toying with, there he's commented out his Docker repo there. Anyway, so it's not a super complicated application. Well, it is to me, but we're going to see if we can launch it on the Flux network. Again, launching something on the Flux network is pretty straightforward. Okay, so now that we've talked about the application and all of the good stuff that Mark is doing, let's go ahead and register this application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to home.run on Flux. I'm going to log in here, and I'm going to log in with Zelcore. Whoops. All right, so I'll put my pin in there. Cool. So once I've signed in successfully, you'll see that pop up here. You'll see a change at the top right to say I'm logged in. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight to applications here. And in this case, I'm going to click on register application. Now, we will come back later and have a look at the management side, but at least for now, I'm going to click on register. And then it's going to have all of my details. So this is a version 7. I'm going to give the application a name. Sigmanauts YouTube. Something like that. Now, next up here, you can maintain an email address here if you wanted to within the brackets here. Again, if your app is getting close to expiring, you will get an email. So the default length of an application, I think it's 30 days, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so they'll start emailing you if it becomes close to expiring. Now, the other thing that you can do, by the way, is go and specify geolocations. So you can block certain locations and you can allow certain locations. Now, where and why would you go ahead and want to do that? Well, it depends on your application if you wanted to spawn on specific places in the world, and that will help your end users from a latency perspective. So if you know, in this case, that most of the miners, let's say, is in the US, I would want to make sure that I have the application specifically hosted there. In this case, I'm not going to do any restrictions, but you can also do subsequently the other way. So you can stop the application from being hosted somewhere else. Now, at the moment, there's about 12,000 nodes out there. So there's lots of geographic locations that will be considered. Now, in terms of instances here, you can maintain, or you can have lots of different instances, again, depending on the application. How many redundancy apps do you want? So by default, Flux provides you 3 instances. What is your period here? So again, you can make this period as long or as little as possible. So for this one, I'm just going to make it a week to try and make it easy in terms of costing. This is really just a video. You can get a static IP. You can do an enterprise application. From what I understand, this just makes sure that some of the stuff is private. Now, again, I'm not going to worry too much about that. What I am very well going to do is I'm going to make use of this new feature here, where I can upload a Docker Compose file. So again, this is part of the new features here that they've subsequently added since I've been doing it. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and just give it a go. So I've already downloaded in my downloads folder that DB branch for Mark's application here. So I'm just going to take that and then I'm going to point it to the Docker Compose file. And if I click open, it's now automatically taken whatever the details are within that Docker Compose file and went and populated all of that information in here. So it's pretty cool. So it saves you from having to populate all of this stuff manually. So again, I'm going to be happy with this and keep it as it is here. Now, again, what you'll need to go and have a look at, and if you're obviously the author or the guy doing the application or coding the application, you would know exactly what to go and put in here. It's sometimes difficult for me because I need to figure out what has happened with the application. If it's not mine, if it's mine, I know exactly what's going on here. But what has happened is it's automatically maintained the environmental variables, the appropriate ports is also specified here. Now, what I'm going to go and change is, and you would have seen that when I looked at the Docker Compose file, you would see it's pointing to another Git repo here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change that to the Docker Hub here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this to that. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to do something like this. Latest. All right. So this makes sure that, I'm using the repo that is supported. So again, if you look at here, so the Docker image namespace / repo and then the tag. So again, that's exactly what I went and specified. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to point it to some other random ports here. So I'm just going to do this. And on top of that, what I am going to make sure of is, and this is just stuff, again, I'm not sure what exactly is going on in the application side, but in case the app also needs some environmental variables and it's coded like that, that's what you would need to go and specify there. So I'm just going to take the same stuff that is there and then plonk it in here. Now, something that I noticed that is not there is you can see he's got the DB name, but it doesn't have like the server pointing to that. So I'm looking for the host as well. So what I'm going to do there is I've already got some stuff here where I would need to go and point it to that. So again, what I'm going to do is, again, this is just a way for me to point this environmental variables to this application there. So that's why I'm pointing it to that name at the top there. So what I'm going to do is just plonk this in there, put a comma in there. I'm hoping that this should be fine. What's important here is that these things sort of marry up. Again, if there's any hard coding happening in the application, then whatever I'm putting in here is nonsense. So it really depends on sort of how it works. Now, in terms of the resources here, so is it 0.5? This is now, again, if you're the guy that creating the app, you've got a good idea of what the spec should be. So I'm just going to leave it here as default, or maybe I'm going to give this thing an extra core. In terms of size, that should be fine. I don't see anything other that's funky here. Again, it's really this easy. If you've got your Docker Compose file set up correctly and everything is hunky-dory, then you can just upload that and off you go. Now, the next steps that I am going to do is have a look at the terms of service. I'm just going to flick off that. I've read it a couple of times. And then I'm now going to compute my message and pay for the service. Okay, so once I clicked on compute here, what you would see is it's got, it's going to register a message and all of your environmental variables and all of that stuff is within the message. So what I need to do is go ahead and sign this message. Now, again, depending on how you want to do it, I'm just going to be making use of my Zelcore to sign here. You can also see already sort of the price associated to this. So specifically for this week, it's going to cost me $1. Again, this price is determined based on the resources that I am sort of renting here. So again, if you need to have this less or this is too much, I know it's too much, but I just don't know the bare minimum I can get away with. But again, depending on the app, you would tweak that. But again, for this demo, it's costing me $1. It's not the end of the world. So I'm going to sign this message first. So again, I'm going to use Zelcore. I'm going to sign it. Once I've signed it, you can see it's got my signature in there. What I'm going to do next is register. So again, that's just signing the message. I'm going to register the application. Now what you can see, it's got a message popping up on the top right saying it's propagating this message across the network. And what you will see, what will happen now is it will now ask me to go ahead and pay. Again, if I pay in Flux here, I get like a 10% discount, which is cool. The other thing that you can also do is you can actually start testing your application. So again, this is a new feature. This didn't exist in the past when I did my application. So you had to go and sort of pay and do everything and only to find out that it's not working and then fix it. So that has definitely changed, which is cool. So you can go ahead and change. Now, what I'm going to do again, I'm going to pay and then test it. So I'm going to first click on test. And what you'll see is it will look at the details that you've got there. So it will now go and download the repo, set up a test instance for you to get your head around that. So again, depending on how big your app is, that might take a long time. So just keep an eye out on the message here at the top. I think it also tells you some stuff here at the bottom. But while that is downloading, again, I know this thing is sort of working already, or I think it's working. I'm not sure exactly what changes Mark's pushed, but I'm happy to pay so long. If it's not working, I'll just fix whatever I need to fix. Also, as I'm talking here now, you can see the pop-up on the top right. So it says Flux app, blah, 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 Sigmanauts YouTube successfully installed and launched. Okay, cool. So you can see here at the bottom, it's now downloaded and has got the at least the test instance happy and going. So again, you can go ahead and look at that. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just quickly going to pay for this. Proceed to pay, and then I will go ahead and pay this. Boom. All right. So there's the transaction. Awesome. Okay, cool. So what has now happened is it has now, I've gone and processed my payment. So what will happen is they will go and have a look at the payment. Once the payment's there, they will start launching your application. Now, what I'm going to do is have a look. And again, if you look at the message here, it's now gone and downloaded, pulled the image, looks at the space, set up the DB, I tested the port, pulled the layer. So FluxOS has sort of done its magic here. So FluxOS is similar. It's a similar orchestration tool like Kubernetes. I think they wrote it with a lot of the Kubernetes stuff in mind. But if I wanted to just test this while I wait for the payment, is I would take this IP address, stick it in here, and then I would point it specifically to the front end port. So what I mean by that is if I just go back to what I did here, and just to refresh you guys' memory, is I pointed it to external port 6331, at least the app component, which is then mapping to the Docker port, which is 850, which is the default Dashy port if you're into Python Dashy stuff. So anyway, so that's the 8050. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to point specifically to that port there. Now, if I hit enter, we will see if the application launches. So we'll give it a second. Internet here down under is pretty slow. So we'll have a look at that now. Now, the other thing while this thing is loading that I just wanted to mention here is the structure specifically of the Flux apps here. So what you will see is in this case, there's two components. There's a DB component and an app component. And when Flux provides an IP address, or provides you an URL for your application. And by the way, you could have specified a custom domain in any one of these in case you wanted to have your own domain. And again, you can just stick it in there. I've got an example where that's working. So you can put that in there. What you would need to do is on Cloudflare or whoever your provider is, you'll need to point the CNAME that we're going to get in a second specifically to that. Now, anyway, so the default web URL will always go against component number one. In this case, it's the DB. So that won't work the way that you wanted it to work. So again, that's just something to take note of. If you have multiple components, the main URL will go against component one. Okay, so let's give it a second. Okay, so after paying and waiting for the app to be deployed, what I would normally go and do next is have a look at the management side. So clicking on this management section here, again, I'm still logged in. So if you don't see anything management come up, you probably logged out or you waited too long. But what you would now see here at the bottom is I've got a new app that I have registered. And you can see here, that's the expiration date. Now, what you will also see here, again, if you've done stuff in the past, you would see my expired apps. And again, here you can see all of the different stuff that I've played with. I've hosted or tried to Dockerize an app for another person, Rylan. I've played with WordPress, with all sorts of things. So most of these things is helping people or having a go at Dockerizing various different apps here. So you can see I've done I Dockerized the Ergo node and put that on the network as well. I had some issues here with the RAM, but and anyway, so if I go back here now, you would see that I have this demo app that we've done here. Now, what you can do here is a couple of things. You can click on visit and it will open up the website for you. Now, if I click on visit here, so I'll just click on that, you would see it won't work. You can see I've got a URL here, Sigmanauts youtube.app.run on Flux. That won't work. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason why it doesn't work is that URL, if I just open it here just for a second, is currently pointing to the Postgres DB, as you can see here. And again, that's just the way that Flux's structure works. So the main URL that it gives is against component number one, which in Mark the Shark's app point of view, that just won't work for us because that is the Postgres database, right? So that's sort of why it doesn't work, which is not an issue. What you would have on component 2, there would be a specific URL pointed to component number 2. And this is what you would put into, let's say, Cloudflare. If you wanted to point to your own URL, you would point it this specific URL. So again, if I take this and I stick it in there, I'm not sure if this is up yet, but we'll have a look. Here you can see currently it's loading up the Dashi app. So here you can see it successfully created the app. This is not correct. I know now because I've played with the Sigmanauts app now a lot, too much that I would like, but currently if it comes up like this, again, the Dashi app is working, but the database side of it is not working. And that's why you're not seeing any data and some of the other stuff that relies on the database. So again, the database is not perfect here, but how I would now go about fixing is to sort of try and reach out to Mark the Shark and find out sort of what code has changed or what's going on really. But let me show you sort of what I would now do either to fix it or to troubleshoot something like that where it's not working as expected. So as I mentioned, this is now specifically here where I would point my CNAME. So as you can see, the app is running. It's not an issue. It's just with our configuration, with some of the environmental variables, it's not lining up. So it's really not connecting the app to the database side. So that's really where the issue is. But anyway, so what I would do next is I would go on manage and I would say manage my app. And I would typically do a couple of things here. The first thing is I would go and have a look at running instances. And in here, you can see sort of where your app is hosted. So it's hosted on 3 servers, all of them in Europe, unfortunately, some in Finland and some in Romania. So that's the first thing that I would do. Now, the other thing that I would do in terms of troubleshooting is I would always come into the log files. So I would always go to log files. And then once that loads, I'll have a read through this and see what the hell is going on. So here you can see I've got 2 areas here for log files. the one for the DB component here and the other one actually for the app. So I would go ahead, either download this or read through it. And here I can already see what's going on here. It's pointing to Postgres user is what I have there. Just having a look through, stopped, ready to accept connections. And then I can see there's all these authentication issues. Role Postgres doesn't exist. Authentication Postgres role doesn't exist. So there's all of these errors that I'm seeing on the database side. And again, that's sort of why the database component is not working. I just need to figure out how I'm going to go about fixing it. But again, the same thing here at the bottom. You can have a look and see the log file specifically for the app component, right? So I can go ahead and look at this and try and figure out what exactly is going on here, or what are the typical errors that I have. And then I would reach out. Again, if it's my app, I would just go and fix it or try and figure out what's wrong. But if it's somebody else's one, I'd need to figure out what the hell is going on. Anyway, so the other thing that I often do here is on global control. So if you are making changes to your app, as an example, right? So I would now reach out to Mark and say, when last have you pushed the code? What should the authentication username and password be for the database? What have you, depending on what the issue is. Whatever the changes that you are making, if you wanted to see it in real time, I would normally come here and do a hard redeploy, which will remove the persistent data and re-download the Docker images and stuff like that. Or if you're not happy with the nodes that your application are on now, I would go and reinstall the application. So I come here quite often. Again, if I just want to see the changes that I'm making. So I would go ahead and do this. At the moment, this is pointing to that specific IP. So if I do click hard redeploy, it's going to do it across all of them. So don't need to worry too much about that. I talked about running instances. If you are making changes to environmental variables, or you want to renew your app, or you want to change the system requirements, that's when I would go into update and renew. So you've got obviously the default options here is just to renew, where you can now renew it for 1 month, a year, or whatever, however you want to do that. However, you can also come in here and update the specifications. Now here you can allow new places or forbid stuff. You can have more instances. You can change the resource requirements. And in this case, what I'll probably do is I will go and fiddle with the environmental variables to see sort of why the database is not connecting. So the app is not connecting to the database. So again, that's what I would now go ahead and do. With all of these changes in here, I would have to go through what you would have seen earlier. I would have to agree again, compute the message, sign a message, pay for the changes, all of that type of stuff. So again, the same sort of steps that I would have gone through to register the app. If I'm making specification changes like that, I would need to go and do the same thing. But that's really how easy it is to get an app on the Flux network. It's not complicated, and the video is probably way longer than it should be. It's just I try to explain some of these different options and why you would use it and why not, or what have you. But the app is up. It's just the database is not connecting, and that's a relatively easy thing, or not easy thing to fix, depending on what the issue is. But that's really how easy it is to get a app on the Flux network.
That's it for this video, guys. If you've liked the video, please like the video and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. If you didn't like the video, please tell me what you would like me to change. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.